Okay,
Yes.
so briefly introduce myself. I'm Ioana Jivet. At the moment, I'm an associate researcher at the DIPF. The translation would be the German Institute for Research in Education. Yeah, and at the same time, I'm also a research coordinator at Studium Digitale, which is a department at the Goethe University in Frankfurt. I was a postdoc at CEL for 2 years, and my main research interests are student-facing learning analytics. And this is also what I will be talking about today, with a bit of like focusing on a really, not a really narrow, but an aspect of student-facing learning analytics, and these are learner goals and goal setting. And wait, I will just start sharing my screen. There we go. I actually, let's say I was expecting a lot more people that don't know a lot about my work. So I hope you will still get to know something new about it, or an interesting perspective. Because in this in the talk today, I planned to cover or discuss some results from 2 studies around student-facing learning analytics and the role of learner goals and goal setting. So hopefully you still find something interesting there. But to provide a bit of context to this talk, let's start in the face-to-face classroom. Here, the teacher plays a very important role in facilitating and guiding the learning process for learners. And in doing so, the teacher is very often a source of feedback for the learners. And ideally, they should be able to give individual feedback to learners, of course, if the class is small enough. But over the last few years, we saw that when moving to an online environment, especially an online learning environment, the contact between students and teachers increases, is not as direct anymore, and it becomes increasingly difficult to divide your attention to tens of students, and in worst cases, hundreds of students that attend one course. We already know from previous studies that if learners are to succeed when learning online, they do need to take more responsibility for their learning and in a way become masters of their own learning. In other words, they need to develop a set of skills that help them to self-regulate, self-manage their learning. And when talking about goal setting, I think it's also important to address this, this aspect of self-regulated learning, because fundamental to the theory of self-regulated learning is that students are agents, that they act with purpose and autonomously, and they are guided by their own goals when they are learning. Of course, based on this, they are also managing their own learning behavior, and they have in place both internal feedback loops where they self-evaluate, but also they need external feedback loops that help them calibrate their internal loops. But for the context today, or for the purpose of this talk today, I think the most important thing is that when we talk about self-regulated learning, we talk about students that have their own learning goals and that they act with a certain purpose in mind and autonomously. Right. This is one part. This is the goal setting or self-regulated learning part. Let's talk a bit about the learning analytics part. So as I mentioned, learning online creates a problem, as learners need to take more responsibility for their own learning. But online environments might also provide a solution, because every action that learners take there, every click, every assignment they submit, every page that they visit, every video lecture that they start, every action can be tracked, timestamped, and stored. And we can look at all this data and try to extract essential information that might be used to support learners to make informed decisions about their learning. And this is how the whole field of learning analytics came to be, because learning analytics is collecting, measuring, analyzing, and reporting data about learners and their context in order to understand and optimize learning and the environments in which learning takes place. So among many possible learning analytics applications, my work focused on dashboards for learners, so student-facing learning analytics. And dashboards are displays that contain multiple indicators about learners, their learning process, or their learning context. Usually they use graphs or charts, sometimes even text, to convey this information back to the learners. You can think about a dashboard very similarly to how a dashboard in a car is supposed to help drivers to make decisions while driving. And a similar concept, as a runner, if you're running, maybe you track your running and you collect a lot of data about your own learning, your pace, the distance that you run, the duration, and so on, the frequency of running, and so on, which helps you monitor your progress and can help you adjust your training, or so on. We also see dashboards in games, also keeping track of your victories or success when playing. So in a similar fashion, dashboards are supposed to or act as feedback tools for learners. And with this information at hand, students are supposed to take action and make decisions about their learning. And when we look at dashboards and the purpose for which they were built, the most of them were built relying on self-regulated learning theory, which, as mentioned, assumes that students are guided by their own goals and that they are managing their own learning. Okay, so the theme of my talk today is taking a look at this loop, at this feedback loop, and try to analyze whether learner goals influence how learners interact with this kind of tools, these dashboard tools, or what kind of needs they have when it comes to such tools. This was supposed to be popping as I was talking, but missed the animation here. But I will particularly look at two aspects. One is the information. So pretty much looking at whether students have different information needs based on different goals that they might have, or if they have different goals, they value different pieces of information. And the second point is about how we can deliver this information to students on dashboards, in the sense that if they have different goals, do they value different ways of delivering this information to them, or different dashboard designs to them. Whenever you have any questions or anything, it would be really great if you can just interrupt me. I really don't mind if we just discuss it as I present some of these findings. So on to the first one, talking about information. So far, dashboards have been designed to provide information to students, and in this scenario, students are passive receivers of information. And so far, we rarely engage with students to understand what information they find meaningful and where do they see value in the feedback that they just received. So a lot of efforts were put into designing dashboards and encoding information into the dashboards. But I think a danger here is that as we are designing dashboards, we embed our own biases. And one particularly that troubles me is it's a cognitive bias called the curse of knowledge. So for example, what we might find a very easy to understand information that we put on a dashboard because we are working in this field and we read a lot and we know a lot about it, might not be seen the same way as a first-year university student, the intended users of such a device. This is one thing. A second thing is that when it comes to dashboard design, in general, students were rarely consulted in deciding what information should be displayed. And these decisions, as I said, they are mainly taken by designers, sometimes in consultation with teachers, people that are developing these kind of tools, researchers many times. And a third issue is that a lot of the data that we have displayed on dashboard so far, let's say in the last 10 years, or 12, 13 years now, since the field actually emerged, is that we rely a lot on data that is available. For example, data that is already being tracked, we rely a lot on log data, instead of flipping the design process the other way around and thinking, what are actually the needs of students? What are sound pedagogical reasons why we should provide this information? And afterwards look for, are we collecting data that can tell us this information, or do we need to find ways to collect this data to be able to provide this information to students? And this is one of the reasons why a lot of early dashboards simply displayed the amount of time students spent online, or the number of times they downloaded certain documents, or simply counting activities that students do. So in order to address this issue, in one study that we did, actually this is a study that I did while at CEL, we flipped the question and we said, yes? Oh, okay. So we tried to flip this question, and we asked ourselves, if we give learners the choice to configure the data on their own dashboard, in other words, if we ask learners what information is relevant for you to receive as feedback, we wanted to see what data would they actually choose to monitor, and also do the goals that they have and the self-regulated learning skills that they have for the course influence this choice. The underlying assumption around this is that what students choose is what they value. So by giving them this choice, we would be able to see what they value. So we gathered input from a large sample of students while having them interact with a dashboard in an authentic learning setting. We wanted to achieve this instead of asking students to imagine themselves in a place where they received the dashboard. So for this purpose, we built a customizable dashboard on which learners could choose indicators that they wish to monitor. This is how the dashboard looked like. So at the top, students could actually enter the goal that they have for the course in free text. In the middle panel, they could select indicators that they wish to see. They had 12 options, but we wanted to limit them. We wanted to ask them to prioritize this. So we asked them to choose, they could choose between minimum 3 and maximum 6 indicators here. At the bottom, we also collected self-regulated learning information for study purposes and some demographic questions. Once students configure the dashboard, this is how it looked like. So at the top, whenever they would come back to the dashboard, they would see their goal. And in the bottom panel, they could see the indicators that they selected represented on a spider chart. When hovering on top of a point, they would get additional information on that specific dimension. Also, we gave students the option to change the goals or the indicators that they chose at the beginning of each week, so they could do that. It wasn't a fixed choice, because we also wanted to see, do they actually change this? Not many did, actually. So they stuck with the first choice. And what I present next will also be the results of their first choice, the way that they initially configured the dashboard. So when we look at the 12 indicators that we put on the dashboard, we wanted to go beyond the classic number of activities that were completed, and we kept 6 of those, the one you see on the left, but we also tried to go beyond that and come up with some indicators that describe learning behavior, to the extent to which it was possible based on the log data that we collected on the platform. So among these, we look, for example, for how much students revise content, or how much they engage in discussions in the forum, and also the last 2, timing of starting activities and timing of completing activities, would be indicators that quantify procrastination to some extent. And all these indicators here have been, apart from online presence, have been found to, in other research, have been found to be linked to higher success in students. Right, so we implemented this dashboard in 2 Coursera MOOCs that are run by the Erasmus University. They are quite different. One of them was for teachers, higher education teachers, about assessment in higher education, and the other one was a more general course, or not so specific course, about business and sustainable development goals. All in all, we had 401 students that accepted to, or gave their consent to participate in the study and had access to the dashboard and used it. So first question, or first part, just looking at what students chose, because this is relevant for the next part, and how goals influence that. We saw that in both courses, the most popular indicators were still content progress indicators, so very simple indicators that count the activities that students do. The only exception being productivity, which we described and calculated as the number of activities that students complete on the same day in which they start them. So very related to completion of learning activities, but quantifying in a way the speed with which they do that. Now, the next step that we took is looking whether there is a relationship between the way that learners formulated their goals. Remember, they could add on the dashboards the goals that they had, and the indicators that they choose to monitor. And for this, we looked at the goals that students entered on the dashboard, and we coded them according to 3 aspects. Whether they have a learning component inside, meaning that students reference that they would like to gain knowledge from the course, understand concepts in the course, gain skills, or transfer the knowledge that they get in their course to their daily practice or daily life. This was the learning component. The second component was a performance component where students mentioned whether they wanted to complete a course or gain a certificate. So it was not related to interacting with the content of the course. And the third component was adding a time frame in the goal. For example, I want to complete the course in 2 weeks or a month or something like that. Then what we try to do is, and these are the results of this coding. So we had in total 215 students that actually entered a goal. Other students just selected indicators, but we had 200 students that also added a goal. And what we see is that there was a significant difference between the two courses in terms of the presence of a learning component in the goal, meaning that learners enrolled in the Assessment in Higher Education course were a lot more interested in acquiring skills, or wrote down that they are more interested in, that their goal would be to acquire skills and transferring this to their own practice. While students in the other course were a lot more interested in obtaining knowledge and understanding concepts and transfer. Actually, this one is here, right? So knowledge, understanding, and transfer. Anyway, there were differences in the goals that students had in the course. Another thing that I find interesting is that around 25% of the students in both courses, or overall, including both types, both a learning component and a performance component in their goals. So they say, I want to understand the topic of the course and complete the course or complete a course or get a certificate. What we did with this information, we tried to predict whether students that had a certain goal components in their goals were more likely to choose certain indicators or not. I won't go into the details or showing table with results. They are presented in the paper. I think it's a lot more interesting to share the actual results and what it is, their relevance. So what we found out is that the way learners formulate their goals in general did not predict their monitoring choices. And this might be because, or one explanation for us is that we have data only about the decisions that learners took, not the motivation behind them. And it is really possible that depending on what motivation students have, they might take a different meaning out of the same indicator. So for example, learners that want to master the topic of a course might see completed activities, the completed activities indicator as a proxy to how much knowledge they acquired so far, while learners that just want to get a certificate see it as how far along towards a certificate they are. They know they have to do all the activities, so for them it's just how close to the certificate they are. Something else that we found out, here might also be like a bit of a limitation, I find it, is that we also analyzed MOOC data, where the motivation for enrolling in the MOOC is usually interest in the topic, not so much the certificate, so having this extrinsic motivator. But if we look at a university or higher education, it's inevitable that quite some students simply want to pass some courses instead of really getting into the knowledge of the course. So this is something to keep in mind. Another thing that we found is that adding a time frame to a goal predicts the selection of one of the procrastination indicators, which is the timeliness of completed activities. So this means that if students, or it means that students that had a time frame in their goal, they were more likely to choose to monitor how close to the deadline they submit their activities. And I think this raises the question, or the interesting question, what would happen if we try to support or nudge students to formulate goals that do include a time frame? Would this lead to them being more interested in monitoring their procrastination? Would this ultimately lead to them actually submitting stuff earlier? This definitely would be something that I would be interested in looking at in the future. Before I move to the design part, or the second part of this talk, are there any questions or comments, or I don't know, some notes? Okay, then I will just move to the second part, and maybe we discuss this about towards the end. Right, so in the second part, let's say we have the ideal information to give to students as feedback. Now the question is, how should we give this information back to students? And of course, there is a lot of research in feedback, but when you talk specifically about dashboards, how can we design dashboards in such a way that we convey this information to students in a way that fits their purpose and their let's say skills and dispositions? So in the second part, or in another study, we wanted to discover what design features learners use to interpret the information on the dashboards. So, right, we wanted to look at design features, and on top of that, we wanted to see whether the goals students have, and again, self-regulated learning skills, if these influence how students perceive these design features, whether they are more relevant or more irrelevant, depending on goals and SRL skills. So for this, we started with a qualitative pre-study where we gave a group of students a dashboard mock-up, which has fictional data on it. And we asked them to put themselves in the shoes of a learner that received this feedback. And we asked them to interpret the information shown and write down their reflection. We actually gave them a few specific questions to reflect on, including how they would change their behavior. We then analyzed the written text, the written self-reflections, and we identified 26 design elements that students noticed on the dashboard or felt that were missing. So, for example, such design elements are the current score, 6.5, the colored skill bars, or the explanations at the bottom of the screen. I think I should mention here that we added some design flaws on purpose in this dashboard, just because we wanted to see if students notice them. And one example would be, for example, the current score is 6.5, but you don't really have a scale. Is this 6.5 out of 10? Is it 6.5 out of 7? So we were missing that, this kind of information. One example of how we extracted these design elements, for example, this is a quote from one of the reflections. It is interesting to see the predictors which could act as alerts to guide me. So out of this quote, we extracted two design elements, and the first one being predictors of learning behavior, because these are the predictions that were shown on the mock-up, and the second one being areas in need of improvement being highlighted, because these are the alerts that the student mentioned. Now, going over all of this, as I mentioned, we obtained 26 design elements. And then we asked 247 students, these were first year and second year university students this time. We asked them to rate how relevant these items are for them. But there was a twist, because we divided the students into two groups and we told each one of them to rate the items having one specific learning goal in mind. For one group, the goal was, their learner goal was to master the topic of the course, so pretty much focus on the learning of the content, while the other one, their goal was to simply pass the course, so finding the path of least resistance through the course. Of course, we also collected self-regulated learning information on this through a questionnaire. Jumping directly to the findings, because I think this is the most interesting part here. So what did we find? First, we found three important design features. The first one, students really need a transparent design, because this really helps them make sense of the information on the dashboard. And under transparency of design, the features that we found were explanations on how indicators are calculated or how this information is relevant to their goal and learning. The second feature were reference frames. Because learners need to contextualize the information that they receive, and for this purpose, they need to compare it to something. And this comparison anchor could be the maximum possible in the course, the maximum number of points that they can get in the course. It can also be their peers and what they are doing or how they are performing, but it can also be their past self, so their performance in a previous test or 2 weeks ago, or the knowledge that they gained in the last 2 weeks, and so on. And finally, a third design feature is support for action, because it's not only important to become aware of your situation when looking at a feedback, but the next crucial step would be doing something about it. Is there something that I need to change? Is there something that I need to do differently? Or is the way that I'm working right now good enough or helping me? So the third feature, support for action, included items like recommendations on either learning activities that should be done or topics to tackle next, or even how to improve their learning behavior. Next, we looked at how the two groups rated these three different design features and whether there were differences between how they are rating these three design features. So first thing that we saw, or that we found, is that learners that have a mastery goal, so who want to gain, were primed to think that they want to gain a lot of knowledge in the course, they rated reference frame significantly higher. And these learners value more seeing their performance in comparison to what is maximum possible in the course, seeing learning behavior indicators, and seeing their performance in comparison to their past performance, compared to students who had an extrinsic goal and just passing the course. To note here is that seeing your performance in comparison to your peers was extremely lowly rated. And there were no differences between the students with a mastery goal or learners who wanted to pass the course. So this was not a popular way to contextualize feedback for students. In general, we also saw that there was a tendency for learners pursuing topic mastery to be more interested in their learning behavior, because we assume is that this would allow them to optimize their learning behavior and thus maximize their learning gains. The next interesting thing that we found is because among self-regulated learning skills, a subscale was assessing students' goal-setting skills. And looking at this specific skill set, we found that students with higher goal-setting skills were more likely to find reference frames and support for action more relevant than students with lower goal-setting skills. And this comes to close the self-regulated learning loop, because a self-evaluation phase with a dashboard kind of glides into another forethought phase. So beginning again the cycle, because in this way learners can use the support for action, the recommendations on what topics to tackle next or how to improve their learning behavior to readjust their goals or set goals for the next week or next learning session and so on. And this comes to show that the learners who already have these skills, because in general, we also saw that students with higher self-regulated learning skills were also more likely to see value in dashboards and in these specific design features. And this comes to show that students who already have these skills, they are more likely to use such tools. And I think a big question that we should ask ourselves and address is, how can we support learners or students who don't have these skills through the information that we display, but also how we provide this information to students, how we design. To wrap this up, I will just go over the lessons learned from these studies, and in general researching goals and the role of goals and goal setting on dashboard design and needs of students. So I think one of them that sticks with me the most is that we need to offer opportunities for practice to students for practicing agency and goal setting. And I find it rather odd that we do say that dashboards are built mainly on self-regulated learning theory, but dashboards or the learning environment in general doesn't account for what goals students have. And there are no opportunities for students to even write down a goal that they might have. So I think we should embed this either in dashboards or in the whole learning environment, and the feedback that we give to adjust it to that. And this brings me to the second point, that we should really consider the context of the learners. For example, when designing dashboards, when we should think about the goals that they have, the skills that they have, the learning dispositions that they have. I'm fully aware that this requires first to be able to measure or detect this in the least intrusive way possible. But at the same time, knowing goals, skills, or dispositions that students have would allow us to personalize feedback to a greater extent and really support students with specific goals instead of providing the same feedback, the same information to everybody. And I really enjoyed working with customizable dashboards, and I think they are an interesting tool to analyze this context or the context of learners, because on the one hand, they are directly an intervention, because students do get that feedback constantly or in an authentic learning setting, but at the same time, they can also be seen as a research instrument or a measurement instrument, because the choices that students make can give us a lot of information about what students find valuable. Of course, we can complement this with qualitative research, with interview with students to really understand the motivations behind why they make these choices, so the why behind it. But simply observing the choices that students make, I think it's a really, really interesting tool that we have. Right, I think one challenge, especially when we talk about students that are highly skilled versus students that are less skilled, especially when we talk about customizable dashboard, is that in order to be able to configure your own dashboard, you need to have enough knowledge and self-awareness to know what you need. And this is rarely the case. So I think we should be able to, on the one hand, provide students with what we think or what research tells us that they might need, but at the same time, look at what they find interesting or what they see interest in order to know where they are and see and tell them, you are interested maybe in this information, but it's not really helping you or your goal. Maybe you can also try to look at this other information. So I think we kind of need to also understand students' perspective a lot more than we do at the moment. And finally, as I mentioned also in the beginning, and also in all these studies, coming up with feedback indicators that it's also possible to calculate from the data was rather difficult, because many times we were limited by the availability of data. So I think in order to really fulfill the needs of students, what we really need to do is first look at what are the needs or wants, needs and wants, and then see if we do have analytics or data that we can use to fulfill these needs. And if not, then we should either look at finding other ways to collect this data, or basically looking for other data sources. This is pretty much what I prepared for today. I didn't show a lot of what I'm currently working on, as this is past work, but I could also show a bit of that if there is interest or specific questions about it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you go back one slide?
Yes.
That was not the question. The first point, offer opportunities for practicing agency and goal setting. What would you think would be different? Because we're currently now running one study in Rotterdam, where basically students each week describe a goal, and each week also monitor the performance on that goal. And then in the next week, they write a new goal. So you get shorter iterations of actually practicing this agency of goal setting and evaluation, and practicing self-regulation skills in that sense, and self-directed learning probably even. So what would you think would be the impact of that?
I think there already are studies that are also doing that, and I think they do show that there is impact. I don't know.
What would you expect to happen? I mean, do just their self-regulation skills go up, or is it? Does it also change the learning practice, like you said before, like when you give them more indicators on a certain dimension, that they then change the behavior on that dimension?
I'm not sure what the impact, the outcome would be, but the first thing that came to my mind right now is thinking of, okay, they do a goal setting and then they next week reflect on it and set a new goal. How I would complement this is trying to analyze the actual goals that students have and see, is there any data that I can provide or to quantify the goals that they have? And then students set a goal over the week. Let's say, okay, maybe we monitor, we give them the data or not, whatever. But next week, when they kind of self-reflect and need to set a new goal, after they self-reflect and you ask them, have you achieved your goal? To what extent do you think? And so on. Then we confront them with data that we collected on that goal. And maybe in this way, they have both an external source of, have I achieved this goal or not? But also they have before this benefit of the self-reflection on the goal. And I think this is really important, or it might be really important, because then they do have this internal feedback loop, right, or self-evaluation, and then they are confronted with external input that they could either agree or disagree. And I think it would be interesting to know over time, if they do this multiple times, to see if their accuracy maybe improves, or if their self-evaluation basically becomes more accurate. That would be an interesting thing to look at. But then, okay, right, a big question or a big if is, can we even quantify this in their goals in data? Are we even able to collect that kind of data that they would do it? And if they write open text, then we need to be able to extract out of the goals that they write the concepts, or I don't know.
Yeah, but what I mean, just to explain what Gabriele does there is then using a rubric for the goals and do a classification similar to what you did with the extraction of the components, the learning components, and the performance components from the goal description. So yeah. I think there are ways to classify and analyze the goals.
Yeah, I actually have, most probably she knows about it, because I think I sent it to her some time ago when we talked about it, where they did this with first-year students, but in a very analog way, not in a digital way. This in a way also goes into what we are doing in one study. Sorry, this is in German, but what we also do is we give students feedback, and at the end we ask them to self-reflect on it, and in a way write how they would change their behavior for next week, for the next or the next learning unit. And we're also showing them what you wrote that you wanted to do last week, so kind of as a prompt in the top part and in the bottom part. And now we also have entries from 500 students, like 2,000 entries from 500 students to analyze, because they did this for 5 learning units. And it's a big challenge coming up with a coding scheme for this, and then manually going through these entries to code them, because they refer to learning strategies that they would like to change, or even some refer to better time management or better planning, or früher anfangen, or starting early. That is very common. But you need a systematic way to analyze this, and we really hope that we can get to a point where we can train a machine learning algorithm on the coding that we already have, so that next year in the same course, when we give the same feedback and so on, we would be able to automatically code that faster. And then, yeah, I don't know, on a meta level, to be able to give feedback to students on the feedback, on their self-reflections or something like that. Somewhere in the future would be nice. But yeah.
Other questions? What time is it?
Yeah.
Sorry. No, we have to consider time. We have 4 more minutes, but there are more questions.
Oh, yeah, you can go. Because mine was not necessarily related to this, so you have some.
Yeah,
Yeah, go.
then I will go. So as it is dashboard for self-regulated learning, or like the learners are gaining also self-regulated learning skills, I guess. So is there any thoughts on like how to measure the growth of self-regulated learning skills, or can it be in some way be reflected via the dashboard, or like at the end results that from your study, or with the coming studies that you're going to conduct in general?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to measure in a short period of time changes in self-regulated learning, because I think this takes really a long time to be able to develop these skills. And I think with dashboards so far, the main theory used as the theoretical background for dashboard design is self-regulated learning, but I don't think it covers all cycles. So a dashboard mainly supports self-reflection and, let's say, monitoring, external monitoring. So it doesn't really, and even then, when it is reflection, it's just a simple display of information without a lot of support to interpret this information and understand what is there. So supporting self-evaluation. So I think, again, it helps good students or students that are already doing this. It's just an external tool for them. So dashboards, as they are, without any scaffolding, I don't think they really improve self-regulated learning. So I would be a bit surprised if they actually did over time. But even that, it's very difficult to measure, because the way that we measure at the moment self-regulated learning is through questionnaires. So you would need to have the same questionnaire given to students multiple times at different points. But I don't think you would see any changes in a month or a few weeks or something like that. I think you really need to work a longer period of time and on subscales, like as we discussed earlier with the goal setting that you do every week. Maybe then, yes, if you get feedback on how your goal setting is, how accurate your goals are, maybe over time you would become to know your abilities better and you are able to set more realistic goals. But I think you also need external input for that, right? Or how to set goals, because it's not something that you just learn by doing, or you need to do a lot of doing before you're able to do it really well.
Okay, we have time for one more. Now you fight. Who wants?
I will be shorter, I promise.
Okay, because mine is really long, but most of us, I think, were at your thesis defense. And then the last question that was asked by your opponent, that really was the biggest cliffhanger ever.
Oh, yeah.
So she said that she didn't believe in learning analytics anymore, that it was just like a bunch of information we just have because we have it, and then we think we should do something with it. And then she said to you that you had 5 minutes to restore her faith in learning analytics, and then everything was cut off. And I went to bed and I had sleepless nights, like no Netflix series whatsoever had like a harsher cutoff. So I was wondering if you could, maybe give us or me a little bit of closure. And elaborate a little bit on that question and restore the faith in learning analytics.
Yeah, that's funny because she's doing eye tracking. but okay. Yeah, I find it a really cool phrased question. And yeah, I know she believes in learning analytics, but anyway, I will just give I think learning analytics can really contribute to or to the so I know what I want to say. I just need to think how to say it. So I think where learning analytics can really help is not really help, but a place where I think they can have a big impact is in helping collect data that can help us further extend existing learning theories. Or because in a way, it does provide us a way to seamlessly collect data about learners, their learning environments. And we can use this data to either confirm theories and so on. Confirm learning theories or not, or extend them. And I think, I don't know. I would say this is one of the arguments. So it allows us to collect data and analyze it and put it in connection to learning theories in such a way that we can extend it. But this also means that we need to take these theories into account when we are designing learning analytics, because I don't think learning analytics are useful if we don't take into account research and theories from educational sciences, learning sciences, and so on. Because all this corpus of knowledge already exists. And as learning analytics was, is supposed to cover the space in between computer science and educational sciences, let's say the part that has a lot of skills in data science and managing or analyzing this data are computer scientists. So then if we don't have this bridge between learning and computer scientists and learning scientists, we won't have value in learning analytics. So if we do learning analytics that way, I would also lose faith in learning analytics. I don't know, this would be just my first thoughts. I don't know, I hope you this helps you a little bit to sleep better.
Yeah, this will help me sleep better.
Oh, that's very good. I think this is a really good final sentence for that presentation. Ioana, thanks again for presenting for us. Has this been recorded?
Yes.
Excellent. Can I ask you directly if you would be fine if we use this internally for sharing with colleagues at the TU Delft?
No problem.
We will put it on YouTube.
On YouTube with a hidden link, right? Or on our channel open?
It's open.
Yeah, is that agreeable for you? Do we need to have that written? Yeah, we will. Okay. Thanks again. There were more people than you could see at once, but you can believe me. And talk to you soon.
Great. Yeah, it was nice seeing all of you again.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.